There are moments in television history so powerful, so quietly revolutionary, that their full meaning takes decades to be truly understood. Nichelle Nichols gave the world one of those moments. For years, she carried stories inside her. Stories about what really happened behind the cameras of one of the most beloved science fiction franchises ever created. Before she passed away in July 2022, she finally let those stories out. What she revealed was not simply a tale of Hollywood politics. It was a window into the courage it takes to hold your ground when the world is telling you that you don't belong in the room. Nichelle Nichols was born Grace Dell Nichols on December 28, 1932, in Robbins, Illinois, a small town just south of Chicago. She was one of 6 children raised in a working-class household, but her spirit was anything but small. From childhood, she was drawn to performance, to music, to movement, to the energy of a live audience. By the time she was 12, she was studying dance at the Chicago Ballet Academy, and by her late teens, she had already begun touring professionally with some of the most celebrated big band musicians of the era. She shared stages with Duke Ellington and Lionel Hampton, learning the discipline and showmanship that would define her career for the next 6 decades. Her path into acting came gradually. She appeared in stage productions in Chicago and New York, took on modeling work, and slowly built a reputation as a performer of real depth and range. A performance in James Baldwin's Blues for Mr. Charlie drew particularly strong critical notice. She was clearly talented. She was clearly ready. What the entertainment industry of the early 1960s was not always ready for, however, was a black woman who refused to shrink herself to fit the roles it had prepared for her. That tension between her talent and the world's limitations became the defining story of her entry into television. When Gene Roddenberry cast her as Lieutenant Uhura in Star Trek in 1966, it was not simply a casting decision. It was, whether the network fully understood it or not, a statement. Uhura was a communications officer aboard the USS Enterprise. Competent, composed, essential to her crew. She did not play someone's servant. She did not exist in the background as set decoration. She was a senior officer, trusted with critical responsibilities, shown as the equal of everyone around her. For a country still living through the civil rights movement, still watching fire hoses turned on peaceful protesters, still debating whether black Americans deserved equal access to schools and lunch counters and voting booths, the image of Uhura on that bridge was electric. Young black girls watching at home saw something they had almost never seen before. A vision of themselves in the future, not marginalized, not forgotten, but central. Nichelle Nichols understood the weight of what she was carrying, even in the early days. But understanding the importance of a role and enjoying the experience of playing it are not always the same thing. Behind the scenes, Nichols faced conditions that stood in quiet but constant contradiction to the progressive image the show projected. She later confirmed what fans had long suspected, that her role was repeatedly diminished in ways both small and systemic. Lines that had been written for Uhura were cut before filming. Scenes that would have expanded her character were trimmed or removed entirely. When promotional materials were assembled for the show, her image was sometimes left out, as though the people making those decisions had not quite internalized that she was a lead cast member and not a supporting afterthought. She felt, at times, deliberately sidelined, visible enough to satisfy the show's diversity credentials, but not empowered enough to truly challenge the comfort level of those in charge. These were not abstract frustrations. They were daily reminders that her presence was tolerated more than it was celebrated. And after the first season wrapped, the accumulation of those moments brought her to a decision. She went to Roddenberry and told him she was leaving. She had been offered an opportunity to return to Broadway. The stage had always been her first love, and she was ready to take it. Roddenberry, to his credit, did not argue with her or dismiss her concerns. He asked her simply to take the weekend before she made her final choice. What happened during that weekend changed the course of her life and, in a very real sense, the course of American cultural history. Nichols attended an NAACP fundraising event where she was told that an admirer wanted to meet her. She expected perhaps an enthusiastic fan. What she found instead was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who greeted her with unmistakable warmth and seriousness of purpose. He told her that Star Trek was the only show on television that he and Coretta allowed their children to stay up late to watch. He told her that her presence on that show was not entertainment. It was representation. It was proof. It was an argument, made every week in millions of American living rooms, that the future could look different from the present. Dr. King's message was direct. She could not leave. Not because the show needed her, though it did, but because the people watching needed her. The little girls who saw themselves in Uhura needed her. The young men and women who were told daily by 1,000 different forces that they did not belong in positions of authority needed her. Nichols wept. When she returned to Roddenberry's office Monday morning and told him what had happened, he wept too. She stayed. And the decision reverberated outward in ways neither of them could have fully anticipated. Whoopi Goldberg, then a young girl watching television in New York, saw Uhura on screen and famously told her mother, "There's a black woman on TV, and she ain't no maid." That moment ignited something in Goldberg that would eventually lead her to Star Trek: The Next Generation, where she played the recurring character Guinan, a role created specifically for her. Mae Jemison, who in 1992 became the first black woman to travel to space, has spoken repeatedly about the influence Nichols and the character of Uhura had on her belief that such a journey was possible for someone who looked like her. The show itself continued to make history, and Nichols was at the center of its most controversial moment. In November 1968, during a Star Trek episode titled Plato's Stepchildren, Nichols and William Shatner shared what is widely recognized as one of the first interracial kisses ever broadcast on American network television. The circumstances were deliberately complicated. Within the story, both characters were being controlled by alien telepaths, giving the network a narrative escape hatch if they needed one. NBC, deeply nervous about Southern affiliate reactions and the broader cultural climate, asked the cast to film an alternate version of the scene without the kiss. Nichols later described what happened next with barely concealed amusement. Shatner, she said, was not willing to let the alternate take be usable. He made faces. He looked at the wrong camera. He mugged and grimaced until every version of the scene without the kiss was effectively ruined. The network, left with no viable alternative, aired the original. When viewers responded, and they did, in large numbers, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. The hate mail existed, as Nichols acknowledged, but it was buried under an avalanche of letters from people who had seen something on their television screens that felt true and right and overdue. One letter in particular stayed with her. It came from a white man in the South who opened by saying that he had always opposed interracial relationships. He did not walk back that position. But he could not deny, he wrote, that the scene had moved him, that something about watching two human beings connect across a line that society had drawn had gotten past his defenses in a way that arguments never had. Nichols cited that letter not as evidence of an enemy won over, but as evidence of something more complicated and perhaps more important: the unique power of representation to reach people where reason cannot. Her relationships with her castmates were, like most things in her life, complicated and real. With Leonard Nimoy, who played Spock, she shared a genuine and lasting friendship. He treated her as a professional equal from the very beginning, advocated for her when she felt overlooked, and provided a kind of steady, respectful companionship that she found genuinely sustaining. George Takei, who played Sulu, was a source of warmth and laughter on set. Their friendship outlasted the show by decades. DeForest Kelley, Dr. McCoy in the series, was in her telling a gentle and decent man who brought a kind of emotional stability to a set that could sometimes feel charged. Her relationship with William Shatner was more complex and evolved over time. She did not pretend that there was no tension between them. There was, and she was not one to paper over uncomfortable truths with polished diplomacy. But she also acknowledged that the relationship changed, that understanding developed, and that she came to appreciate what he had done during that interracial kiss episode as an act of genuine solidarity, even if his off-screen personality was harder to navigate. When Star Trek ended its original run in 1969, Nichols did not step away from public life. She returned to the franchise in its animated form, lent her voice to the character she had made iconic, and appeared in 6 of the franchise's feature films. But perhaps the most remarkable chapter of her post-Star Trek life had nothing to do with acting. In the late 1970s, NASA approached her about helping to diversify its astronaut recruitment program. The agency recognized that its image, uniformly white, uniformly male, was discouraging entire categories of qualified applicants from even applying. Nichols threw herself into the work with the same intensity she had brought to every stage of her career. She traveled extensively, appeared at recruitment events, and used every bit of her public profile to communicate a simple message. Space belongs to everyone, and everyone belongs in space. The results were extraordinary. Among the recruits who came in during that period were Dr. Sally Ride, the first American woman in space; Colonel Guyon Bluford, the first African American in space; Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, Charles Bolden, Frederick Gregory, and Laurie Garver, a group whose collective contributions to space exploration permanently reshaped what the program looked like and what it was capable of. Nichols regarded this work as among the most meaningful things she had ever done. She continued to act in the years that followed, taking on roles in television, film, and voice work that showcased the breadth of a talent that had never been fully utilized during her Star Trek years. She appeared in Heroes on NBC, playing a resilient grandmother in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. She had a recurring role on The Young and the Restless that earned her a Daytime Emmy nomination. She released music, 2 albums that allowed her to return to the singing career that had launched her into the entertainment world in the first place. In 2015, she experienced a minor stroke, and the years that followed were marked by gradual decline. The announcement in 2018 that she had been diagnosed with dementia devastated fans who had followed her for half a century. Legal disputes arose around her care and the question of who should be making decisions on her behalf. Painful, public battles that she would not have chosen but that reflected the complicated realities of aging in the public eye. Her son, Kyle Johnson, eventually obtained conservatorship to oversee her well-being. Through all of it, what people who knew her and saw her in her final years consistently described was a woman who had not surrendered her sense of self. She still smiled. She still connected with the people around her. She still carried herself with the dignity that had defined her since she first sat down at that communications console and made history without raising her voice. Nichelle Nichols died on July 30, 2022, in Silver City, New Mexico. She was 89 years old. In keeping with the life she had lived, always reaching towards something beyond the horizon, her ashes were sent into deep space. It was a fitting end for a woman who had spent her entire adult life insisting that the future was something worth fighting for, and that the people most often told they had no place in it deserved to be there most of all. What she confirmed before she died was not a scandal in the conventional sense. There were no shocking revelations designed to wound or embarrass. What she confirmed was quieter and, in its way, more important, that doing meaningful work is hard, that the institutions we celebrate for their progressiveness often resist it from within, and that staying, simply refusing to walk away, can be the most revolutionary act available to a person. She stayed. And because she stayed, the world is genuinely different. The legacy of Nichelle Nichols does not belong to Star Trek, though the show was where most of the world came to know her. It belongs to every person who looked at a screen and saw a version of themselves in a future that had been designed to exclude them. It belongs to every scientist and astronaut and dreamer who was told the stars weren't theirs and refused to believe it. It belongs, most of all, to the quiet, unshakable conviction she carried her entire life, that representation is not a courtesy, it is a right, and that the work of making it real is never finished. She knew what she had done. And in the end, she wanted the rest of us to know it too.